The snow fell in thick, silent sheets outside the diner window, each flake catching the neon glow of the open 24 hours sign like tiny fragments of shattered glass. I pressed my forehead against the cold pane, watching the empty street of this forgotten Minnesota town, and wondered, not for the first time, if we'd finally run far enough. "Mama, is Santa gonna find us here?" I turned from the window to find Luca standing beside our corner booth, his dinosaur pajamas peeking out from beneath the 2 large winter coat I'd bought him at a thrift store 3 towns ago. His dark curls, so like his father's it sometimes stole my breath, were messy from sleep, and his brown eyes held that particular blend of hope and worry that had become far too familiar on his 4-year-old face. "Of course he will, baby." I pulled him onto my lap, breathing in the scent of the cheap motel shampoo and the peppermint hot chocolate I'd let him have before bed. Santa always knows where good boys are. Unlike some people, I thought bitterly. Unlike the man we'd been running from for 18 months. The diner smelled like burnt coffee and maple syrup, with an underlying note of grease that had probably been absorbed into the vinyl booth seats decades ago. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, flickering occasionally in a way that made my exhausted brain conjure shadows where there were none. I'd learned to see threats everywhere, in every dark sedan that passed, in every man who looked too long, in every coincidence that felt too convenient. "You want more cocoa, sweetheart?" Dolores, the night shift waitress, appeared with her ever-present coffee pot. She was somewhere in her 60s, with hair dyed an improbable shade of red, and a tendency to call everyone sweetheart or Han. She'd been kind to us during our 3 weeks in Frost Creek, never asking too many questions about why a young woman and her son were living in the Pineview Motel, or why I always paid in cash. "No, thank you." I managed a smile. "Just the check, please." My shift had ended 20 minutes ago, but I'd lingered, watching the snow accumulate, dreading the walk back to our motel room with its rattling heater and paper-thin walls. It was Christmas Eve, or Christmas morning now, technically, since it was past midnight. Somewhere, families were sleeping peacefully under twinkling trees, secure in their warm homes, never knowing what it felt like to live with your heart in your throat, always waiting for the axe to fall. Dolores waved her hand dismissively. "It's on me, hun. Merry Christmas." She winked at Luca. "Santa's gonna be here soon, little man. Better get to bed." Guilt twisted in my stomach. Dolores had been nothing but kind, and I hadn't even told her my real name. She knew me as Sarah Bennett, though my birth certificate said Elena Castellano, a name I hadn't spoken aloud in over a year. I bundled Luca into his coat and boots, then pulled on my own threadbare jacket that did little against the Minnesota winter. The bell above the diner door chimed as we stepped out into the cold, and the wind immediately cut through my clothes like a blade. Luca pressed against my side, and I wrapped my arm around him, trying to shelter him as we walked. The street was deserted, buried under several inches of fresh snow. Our footprints would be the only ones marring its perfect surface, a thought that sent a chill through me that had nothing to do with the temperature. Too visible, too easy to track. The Pineview Motel sat 3 blocks away, a squat building with peeling paint and a sign that buzzed and flickered even in the best weather. During our walk, I kept my head down, mentally calculating our funds. Another 2 weeks, maybe 3 if I picked up extra shifts, and we could move on. I never stayed anywhere longer than 2 months. It was safer that way. We were half a block from the motel when I noticed the car. It sat in the parking lot where no car had been when I'd left for my shift 6 hours ago, a black SUV with tinted windows, expensive and utterly out of place in this dying town, where most people drove pickups or sedans from the previous decade. Snow had accumulated on its hood, but not enough. It hadn't been there long. My heart began to pound. I pulled Luca closer, my mind racing through possibilities. A guest at the motel? Unlikely, given the hour and the weather. Someone visiting one of the other residents? Possible. But the Pineview's long-term tenants weren't the type to receive visitors in luxury vehicles. "Mama, you're holding too tight." Luca's voice was small, confused. I forced myself to loosen my grip, to keep walking at a normal pace even as every instinct screamed at me to run. Maybe I was being paranoid. Maybe 18 months of looking over my shoulder had finally broken something in me, made me see danger where there was only coincidence. But coincidences had nearly gotten us caught before. We reached our room, number 7, ground floor, with a door that faced the parking lot. I fumbled with the key, my hands shaking from more than just cold, acutely aware of the SUV sitting 30 feet away. The lock finally gave, and I ushered Luca inside, immediately throwing the deadbolt and chain. The room was exactly as we'd left it. 2 double beds with faded floral bedspreads, a TV that only got basic channels, a small bathroom with a rust-stained sink. Luca's few toys were scattered on one bed, action figures and coloring books, things I'd picked up at dollar stores along our journey. Under the other bed, hidden in a duffel bag, was everything else we owned. Clothes, documents, some real, some forged, and the emergency cash I kept for the day we'd need to disappear again. "Brush your teeth, baby. It's way past bedtime." I kept my voice light, but I moved to the window, carefully pulling back the thin curtain just enough to see outside. The SUV sat silent and dark, snow continuing to gather on its surfaces. No one got out, no movement at all. I let the curtain fall and turned to find Luca watching me with those 2 knowing eyes. "Is he here?" he asked quietly. My breath caught. We never talked about his father. I'd tried so hard to shield him, to make this feel like an adventure rather than a desperate flight. But children see more than we think. They feel the tension in our bodies, hear the fear in our voices even when we try to hide it. "No, sweetheart. No one's here. Just us." I knelt down, cupping his small face in my hands. "Just us, like always. You're safe. I promise." It was a promise I'd made 100 times, in a dozen different motel rooms, in towns whose names blurred together. A promise I wasn't sure I could keep, but would die trying. Luca brushed his teeth while I tucked the duffel bag closer to my bed, running through our escape plan in my mind. If I needed to, I could have us out the bathroom window in under a minute. I'd practiced. The bus station was 4 blocks away. By dawn, we could be 3 states over. I was being paranoid. I had to be. But as I helped Luca into bed and pulled the covers up to his chin, as I sang him the Italian lullaby my own mother had sung to me, I couldn't shake the feeling that our time in Frost Creek was over, that the fragile peace we'd found here was about to shatter. "Mama?" Luca's voice was drowsy now, his eyes already half closed. "Can we have a real Christmas next year, with a tree and everything?" "Yes, baby. I promise." Another promise I didn't know if I could keep. He fell asleep within minutes, his breathing deep and even. One hand curled around his favorite toy car, a red Ferrari I'd found at a garage sale, not knowing then the bitter irony of it. His father had owned a red Ferrari once, probably still did, along with a dozen other obscenely expensive toys. I sat on my bed, fully dressed, and waited, watched the clock tick from 1 to 2 to 3 in the morning. The SUV remained in the parking lot, undisturbed. Snow continued to fall. Christmas morning arrived in silence. Maybe I really was losing my mind. Maybe I was seeing ghosts where there were none. At 4:30, exhaustion finally dragged me under. I fell asleep sitting up, my shoes still on, my hand resting on the duffel bag that held our entire life. I woke to knocking, not pounding. That would have been less terrifying somehow. This was measured, patient. 3 knocks, then silence. 3 more knocks. The kind of knocking that said the person on the other side had all the time in the world and knew you were inside. Pale winter light filtered through the curtains. 6:43 a.m., according to the clock. Luca was still asleep, undisturbed by the sound. The knocking came again. 3 measured beats. I stood slowly, every muscle in my body coiled tight. Moved to the door, looked through the peephole. A man stood on the other side, alone. He was tall, powerfully built beneath an immaculate black wool coat that probably cost more than I'd earned in the past 6 months. Dark hair, touched with gray at the temples. A face that might have been handsome if it weren't so carefully blank, so utterly devoid of warmth. He stood with the stillness of someone accustomed to being obeyed, his hands relaxed at his sides. But it was his eyes that made my blood run cold when they lifted to the peephole, as if he knew exactly where I was standing. Dark eyes, calculating, patient. And behind him, barely visible in the frame, I could see 2 more men, security, built like walls, hands clasped in front of them in that particular stance that said they were armed and trained. This was no random guest, no coincidence. The man spoke, his voice carrying clearly through the door despite its measured softness. "Mrs. Castellano, it's Christmas morning. Your son should wake up in his own bed, don't you think? Not in a motel room in a town so small it doesn't appear on most maps." My hand flew to my mouth, stifling the gasp that threatened to escape. He knew. He knew my real name, which meant, "My name is Vincent Moretti," the man continued, and the world tilted beneath my feet. "I believe you knew my nephew, briefly, before you disappeared with something that belongs to my family." Moretti. The name that had haunted my nightmares. The family that controlled half of New York's underworld, that had connections reaching into every major city from Boston to Miami. The family I'd been running from since the night I discovered exactly who Luca's father really was. "I'm not here to hurt you, Elena." Vincent Moretti's voice remained calm, almost gentle. "I'm here to bring you home, both of you. Your son deserves to know his family, deserves the life that's his birthright." My hand was on the doorknob before I realized it, every instinct screaming at me to run, but there was nowhere to go. The bathroom window led to an alley, but there would be men there too. Men like Vincent Moretti didn't knock on doors without securing all the exits first. "There's nowhere left to run, Elena." He said it kindly, almost regretfully. "You've led us on quite a chase, 18 months through 11 states. Impressive, truly, for a woman with no training and limited resources. But it's Christmas morning and your son is waking up." I turned to find Luca sitting up in bed, rubbing his eyes, confusion giving way to alarm as he sensed my fear, and Vincent Moretti knocked again, 3 patient beats, like the ticking of a clock that had finally run out. I didn't open the door. Instead, I moved to Luca's bed, placing myself between him and the entrance like a human shield. My mind raced through impossible scenarios, grabbing him and running, screaming for help, barricading ourselves inside, all futile. Vincent Moretti hadn't come alone, and men like him didn't make threats they couldn't back up. "Mama?" Luca's voice trembled. He clutched his toy car, his knuckles white. "Who is it?" Before I could answer, Vincent spoke again, his voice carrying that same unsettling patience. "I understand you're frightened. That's reasonable, given what you think you know about us. But I'm going to ask you to open this door, Elena, because the alternative is that I open it myself, and I'd prefer not to frighten the boy more than necessary." It wasn't a threat, exactly, just a statement of fact delivered in a tone that suggested he found the entire situation mildly inconvenient. "If I open it," I called back, hating how my voice shook, "you'll take him. You'll take my son." Silence stretched for several heartbeats. Then, "Your son is already mine, Mrs. Castellano. He's been mine since the moment he was born. Opening the door simply determines whether we have this conversation like civilized people or whether my men break it down. I'm offering you dignity. I suggest you accept it." Luca whimpered, pressing against my side. I wrapped my arms around him, breathing in his familiar scent, memorizing the weight of him against me. How many more times would I get to hold him like this before they took him away? Before Vincent Moretti decided a wanted criminal wasn't fit to raise a child born into his world. 5 seconds, Elena. My hand shook as I reached for the deadbolt. The chain rattled as I slid it free. The lock clicked with a finality that felt like sealing our fate. I opened the door 6 inches, keeping my body blocking the gap. Vincent Moretti stood exactly where he'd been, unmoved by the weight. Up close, he was even more imposing, 6'3" at least, with the kind of build that came from discipline rather than vanity. His black coat was unbuttoned despite the freezing temperature, revealing an impeccably tailored charcoal suit beneath. A thin scar ran along his jawline, barely visible but somehow making him more dangerous rather than less. He wore no jewelry except a watch that probably cost more than most cars. But it was his eyes that held me frozen. Dark, almost black. They assessed me with the clinical detachment of a surgeon deciding where to make the first incision. No anger, no cruelty, just absolute certainty that he would get exactly what he'd come for. "Thank you." He inclined his head slightly, a gesture that might have been polite in any other context. "May I come in?" This conversation would be better conducted in private. "No." The word came out stronger than I felt. "Whatever you have to say, you can say it from there." Something flickered across his face. Amusement, perhaps, or approval. "Very well. Your son's father is dead, Mrs. Castellano. Marco died 3 months ago. Lung cancer, stage 4. He spent his final weeks asking for you and the boy he'd never met." The world lurched. Dead. Marco was dead. The man I'd loved and fled from, the charming investment banker who'd turned out to be an enforcer for the Moretti family. The father of my child, gone. I should have felt relief. Instead, I felt nothing but a spreading numbness. "I don't believe you," I whispered. Vincent reached into his coat, slowly, deliberately, giving me time to see he wasn't drawing a weapon, and pulled out a folded newspaper. He held it where I could see the headline, "Marco Castellano, 34, beloved nephew of Vincent Moretti." The obituary photo showed Marco's face, thinner than I remembered, but unmistakably him. "He was a fool," Vincent continued, his voice taking on a harder edge. "He betrayed family trust, stole from the organization, and got himself killed by his own stupidity. But before he died, he told me about you, about his son. He begged me to find you, to bring the boy home where he belongs. Luca belongs with me." I pulled my son closer, feeling his small body trembling. "Marco gave up any rights to him when he what?" Vincent's eyes narrowed. "When he conducted business you found distasteful? When he provided the lifestyle you enjoyed until your conscience became inconvenient? You knew what he was, Elena. Perhaps not the specifics, but you knew. The expensive gifts, the cash payments, the phone calls he took at odd hours. You chose not to ask questions. Heat flooded my face because he was right. I had known, on some level. I'd just convinced myself it was something less dark. Corporate corruption, maybe, or tax evasion. Not the brutal reality of organized crime. "I was pregnant," I said, hearing the defensiveness in my own voice. "I found documents in his office. Bank accounts, names of people who'd disappeared. I couldn't. I wouldn't raise my child in that world." "So you stole $50,000 from his safe and ran." Vincent's voice remained calm, but something cold entered his eyes. "That money wasn't his, Elena. It belonged to the family. Which means you've been living on stolen funds for 18 months, and my nephew died in debt because of you." Shame and anger warred in my chest. I took what I needed to survive, to protect my son. "Our son," Vincent corrected softly. "The moment Marco died, Luca became the last of his bloodline, which makes him family, my responsibility." He paused, letting that sink in. "I'm not here to punish you, Mrs. Castellano, despite your theft. I'm here to bring you both home, to New York, where Luca will be raised with every advantage, every protection, where he'll learn what it means to be a Moretti." "No." The word came out fierce, final. "I won't let you turn him into what Marco was. I won't." "You won't let me?" Vincent's voice dropped to something barely above a whisper, and somehow that was more terrifying than if he'd shouted. "You're living in a motel that charges by the week. You work the night shift at a diner for minimum wage plus tips. You're wearing a coat with a broken zipper in the middle of a Minnesota winter. Tell me, Mrs. Castellano, exactly how you plan to stop me from doing anything I choose to do?" Behind him, one of his security guards shifted slightly, a subtle reminder of the force at his disposal. I had no answer. We both knew it. Vincent's expression softened fractionally. "I'm not a monster, despite what you may believe. I'm offering you a choice. Come with us willingly. Live in comfort. Let Luca know his heritage, or..." He paused. "Or I make a phone call, and by tomorrow, social services will be investigating reports of neglect. A mother with no fixed address, no stable income, moving her child from town to town with forged documents. How do you think that ends, Elena?" My vision blurred with tears I refused to let fall. He had me cornered, and he knew it. Even if I ran again, he'd find us. He'd proven that. And now he had ammunition, the threat of taking Luca through legal means, of painting me as an unfit mother. "Please." I hated the break in my voice, the desperation. He's all I have. Don't take him from me. I'm not taking him. Vincent's voice gentled slightly. I'm bringing you both home. Together. You're the boy's mother. That means something in our world. You'll be provided for, protected. All I ask is that you stop running and let us give Luca the life he deserves. And if I refuse, the temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. Then I take him anyway, and you spend the next decade fighting through courts you can't afford to access, while your son grows up believing his mother abandoned him. Is that really the choice you want to make? Luca's hand found mine, his small fingers gripping tight. Mama, I'm scared. I looked down at him, at his dark eyes so like Marco's, at the curve of his cheek, the way his hair curled at his temples. Everything I'd done for 18 months had been to protect him. Every lie, every midnight escape, every moment of terror, all of it to keep him safe from this world. But maybe Vincent was right. Maybe there was nowhere left to run. Maybe the best I could do now was stay with him. Try to shield him from the worst of it. Pray that my presence might make some difference. If I agree, I said slowly, each word costing me, I stay with him. Always. You don't separate us. Ever. Vincent studied me for a long moment, then nodded once. Acceptable. You have my word. The word of a criminal. The bitterness escaped before I could stop it. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. The word of a man who honors his commitments, Mrs. Castellano. In my world, that's worth considerably more than any legal contract. Now gather your things. We have a plane waiting. A plane? It's Christmas morning. I own the plane, he said simply, as if that explained everything. Perhaps it did. We'll be in New York by noon. Luca will wake up tomorrow in a proper bed, in a room filled with toys, with a future that doesn't involve fleeing in the night. He stepped back from the doorway, giving me space but making it clear this conversation was over. His security guards remained visible, flanking the entrance, a reminder that cooperation was my only option. I turned to our room, to the shabby motel existence I'd built from desperation and fear. Luca watched me with wide eyes, trying to be brave and failing. We're going on a trip, baby, I told him, forcing my voice to stay steady. Remember how I told you about New York? The big buildings and the lights? Like in the movies? Hope crept into his voice, fragile and heartbreaking, just like in the movies. I packed quickly, shoving our meager belongings into the duffel bag. Everything we owned fit in one bag. That's what our life had become. Luca clutched his toy car, silent now, sensing that something fundamental had shifted. When I emerged from the bathroom, Vincent was inside the room, examining it with undisguised distaste. Up close, in the cramped space, he seemed even larger, his presence overwhelming. He smelled of expensive cologne and cold winter air, utterly out of place in our worn-down refuge. His eyes fell on Luca, and something changed in his expression. Not warmth exactly, but recognition. Assessment. He crouched down slowly, bringing himself to eye level with my son. Hello, Luca. I'm your Uncle Vincent. Luca pressed against my leg, uncertain. I don't have an uncle. You do now. Vincent's voice remained gentle, but firm. You have a whole family waiting to meet you. Your grandmother, your cousins, people who've been looking for you for a very long time. Will there be presents? The question was so innocently childlike it made my chest ache. More presents than you can count, Vincent promised. He stood, his attention shifting back to me. The car is waiting, shall we? It wasn't really a question. I took Luca's hand and followed Vincent Moretti out of room 7 for the last time, leaving behind the life I'd built from fear and desperation. The snow had stopped falling, leaving Frost Creek buried under a pristine white blanket that made everything look clean and new. The black SUV's engine was running, warm air already heating the interior. Vincent opened the back door himself, ushering us inside with a courtesy that felt more ominous than comforting. The seats were leather, heated, obscenely comfortable after months of secondhand furniture and motel beds. As we pulled away from the Pine View Motel, I watched through the window as our refuge disappeared behind us. Luca fell asleep against my side within minutes, exhausted by stress and fear. I stroked his hair and tried not to think about what waited for us in New York. Vincent sat across from us, making a call in Italian too rapid for me to follow. When he ended it, he studied me in the dim light. "You love him," he observed. Not a question. "More than my own life." "Good. That's good." He seemed to choose his words carefully. "Whatever else happens, Elena, remember that. As long as you love him, we can find a way forward." I wanted to ask what he meant, but exhaustion was pulling me under. The warmth of the car and the stress of the morning finally taking their toll. My last thought before sleep claimed me was that I'd made a deal with the devil himself, and there was no going back now. I woke to the hum of jet engines and the scent of leather and expensive coffee. For a disorienting moment, I thought I'd dreamed it all. The knock on the door, Vincent Moretti, the surrender of everything I'd fought to protect. Then I opened my eyes to find myself on a private plane, stretched across a cream-colored sofa that probably cost more than a year's rent, with a cashmere blanket tucked around me that I didn't remember anyone placing there. Luca was gone. Panic shot through me like electricity. I bolted upright, the blanket falling away, my heart hammering against my ribs. The cabin was spacious, decorated in muted grays and golds, with windows showing nothing but clouds and winter sky. We were airborne. How long had I been asleep? "He's fine." Vincent's voice came from across the cabin. He sat in a leather chair, his coat removed, his shirt sleeves rolled to his elbows in a gesture that should have made him seem more casual but somehow didn't. He was reading something on a tablet, his posture relaxed but alert. Always alert, I was beginning to realize. Men like him never truly rested. "Where is he?" My voice came out hoarse, threatening. "In the bedroom, watching cartoons." "One of my men is with him." Vincent set down the tablet, his dark eyes finding mine. "You were exhausted. I thought it best to let you sleep. You thought..." I stood on shaking legs, anger replacing fear. "You don't get to make decisions about my son without my permission. Where is he?" Vincent gestured to a door at the rear of the cabin. "Through there. Go see for yourself. But lower your voice, Mrs. Castellano. You're on my plane, under my protection, and hysteria won't serve anyone." I wanted to scream at him, to claw at that infuriating calm. Instead, I crossed to the door and pushed it open. The bedroom was obscene in its luxury. A king-sized bed, mahogany furniture, another sitting area. And there, on a smaller sofa, sat Luca with a plate of half-eaten pancakes, his eyes glued to a flat-screen TV showing some animated movie. Beside him sat a man built like a boulder, with a shaved head and a scar across his nose, who was watching the movie with what appeared to be genuine interest. "Mama?" Luca scrambled off the sofa and ran to me, syrup still on his fingers. "Uncle Vincent's friend Marco made me pancakes. Real ones with chocolate chips. And there's orange juice and everything." The man, Marco apparently, though the name sent a chill through me, stood and gave a respectful nod. "Mrs. Castellano. The boy's been no trouble. Ate well, used the bathroom, hasn't stopped talking about his dinosaurs." His voice was surprisingly gentle for someone who looked like he could break concrete with his bare hands. "Thank you," I managed, though the words tasted wrong. I shouldn't be thanking one of Vincent's men for watching my son. I shouldn't be here at all. "We'll be landing in 40 minutes, Marco said. "Mr. Moretti thought you'd want to freshen up before we arrive. There's clothes in the closet, your size. Bathroom's through there." He left, closing the door behind him with a soft click. Luca tugged at my hand, pulling me toward the TV. "It's The Lion King, Mama. Have you seen it? Simba's dad just died and it's really sad. But Marco says it gets better." I sank onto the sofa, pulling him onto my lap, breathing in his familiar scent beneath the smell of syrup and chocolate. "I've seen it, baby. It does get better." "Are we really going to live in New York, in a big house?" Yes, I think so. Will I have my own room, with toys and stuff?" The hope in his voice killed me. "I'm sure you will." I kissed the top of his head, holding him tighter than necessary. "But Luca, I need you to listen to me. These people, Uncle Vincent and his friends, they're family, but they're also complicated. I need you to stay close to me, okay? Don't wander off. Don't go anywhere without telling me first." He twisted in my lap to look at me, his small face serious. "Are they bad people?" Like in the stories? How did I answer that? How did I explain to a 4-year-old that we'd been pulled into a world where morality existed in shades of gray, where the man who'd given him chocolate chip pancakes probably had blood on his hands? They're your family, I said finally. And family is complicated, but I'll always keep you safe. That's a promise. He seemed satisfied with that, turning back to the movie. I held him and watched Simba mourn his father and tried not to see the parallels in our own story. Luca would mourn Marco eventually, when he was old enough to understand what he'd lost. A father he'd never known, dead before they could meet. Another thing Vincent Moretti's world had stolen from us. When the movie ended, I carried Luca to the bathroom, marble and gold fixtures, towels softer than anything I'd touched in months, and washed the syrup from his hands and face. Then I turned to the closet Marco had mentioned. Inside hung several outfits in exactly my size, tags still attached. Designer labels I recognized from the brief period when Marco had showered me with gifts, back when I'd thought his money came from legitimate sources. Dark jeans that fit perfectly. A cream-colored sweater in cashmere. A black wool coat that actually had a working zipper, lined with silk. Boots that were practical, but elegant. Someone had studied me, taken my measurements, anticipated my needs. The thought made my skin crawl even as I stripped off my threadbare clothes and changed into the new ones. They fit like they'd been made for me, probably had been. I looked at myself in the mirror, a stranger in expensive clothes, with dark circles under her green eyes and tension in every line of her body. I looked like I belonged in Vincent Moretti's world, even if I'd never feel like I did. When I emerged, Vincent was waiting in the main cabin. His eyes swept over me once, assessing, then nodded with what might have been approval. Better, he said simply. Sit. We need to talk before we land. I sat across from him, Luca still in the bedroom with Marco and his cartoons. Vincent poured coffee from a silver carafe into delicate china cups, adding cream to mine without asking how I took it. He'd done his research. Of course he had. Your life is about to change significantly, he began, his tone businesslike. I want you to understand what that means. You'll be living in the family estate in Westchester. 23 rooms, 15 acres, full staff and security. You and Luca will have your own wing. Bedroom, playroom, sitting area. Privacy when you want it, but always protected. Protected from what? I wrapped my hands around the coffee cup, seeking its warmth from people who would use you to get to us. From law enforcement who would love nothing more than to turn you into a witness. From rivals who might see Luca as leverage. His voice remained calm, but something dark flickered in his eyes. The Moretti name provides many advantages, Elena, but it also paints a target on your back. You're under my protection now. That means you don't leave the estate without security. You don't speak to anyone I haven't vetted. You don't make decisions that could compromise the family's interests. So I'm a prisoner. The words came out flat. You're protected, he corrected. There's a difference. You'll have everything you need. Money, clothes, education for Luca. The best schools, the best doctors. A life most people only dream of. All I ask in return is your cooperation and your silence. And if I don't cooperate, Vincent leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his eyes locked on mine with an intensity that made it hard to breathe. Then I'll be forced to take measures I'd prefer to avoid. Luca is family, Elena. That's non-negotiable, but your place in his life is contingent on your behavior. Push me, and I'll find other arrangements. A boarding school in Switzerland, perhaps. Supervised visits twice a year. Is that what you want? My hands shook, coffee sloshing in the cup. You said you wouldn't separate us. I said I wouldn't separate you if you came willingly. Cooperation was implied. His voice softened slightly. I'm not trying to threaten you, Elena. I'm trying to make you understand the reality of your situation. You're in my world now, my rules. But if you work with me instead of against me, I promise you'll find I can be remarkably generous. Generous, I repeated bitterly. Is that what you call kidnapping? I call it family obligation. He sat back, his expression unreadable. Marco was my sister's only child. She died when he was young, and I raised him as my own. He made mistakes, terrible ones. But he was still blood, and Luca is all that remains of him. I won't lose that boy to your fear and stubbornness. Something in his voice made me look at him more carefully. Beneath the cold authority, there was something else. Grief, maybe. Loss. Vincent Moretti had lost his sister, then his nephew. In his world, family was everything, and Luca represented the last thread connecting him to people he'd loved. It didn't excuse what he was doing, but it explained it. "I want to understand something," I said carefully. "You say Luca is family, but what about me? What am I to you?" An inconvenience that became a necessity. His bluntness was almost refreshing. "You're the mother of my nephew's child. That gives you status, protection, but also responsibility. You're expected to raise Luca with an understanding of who he is, where he comes from, to prepare him for the role he'll one day play in this family. And what role is that?" Vincent's smile was thin and sharp. "That depends on the man he becomes, but he's a Moretti, Elena. That means something. That means everything." The plane began its descent, my ears popping with the pressure change. Through the window, I could see the New York skyline emerging from the clouds, the familiar spires and towers of a city I'd once called home, back when I'd been naive enough to believe in happy endings. "There's one more thing," Vincent said as we prepared to land. "My mother lives at the estate. She's traditional, conservative. She'll have opinions about you, about this situation. I suggest you show her respect, regardless of how she treats you. And if she tries to take Luca from me, she won't." His voice carried absolute certainty. "Because I won't allow it. You have my word, Elena. As long as you cooperate, as long as you don't betray the family, Luca stays with you. But cross me, and that protection evaporates. Are we clear?" Crystal. The plane touched down with barely a bump, taxiing to a private hangar where 2 more black SUVs waited. Marco emerged from the bedroom carrying Luca, who was chattering excitedly about the plane and the clouds and everything he'd seen. "Mama, did you see how high we were? Marco says we were in the stratosphere. I saw, baby." I took him from Marco, settling him on my hip even though he was getting too big for it. I needed to feel his weight, his warmth. Needed the reminder of why I was doing this. Vincent led us down the stairs and into the waiting SUV, the December cold biting at my face. New York smelled different than Minnesota. Exhaust and concrete, and the particular electricity of millions of people living on top of each other. It smelled like coming home, even though this would never truly be home again. The drive to Westchester took 45 minutes through Christmas afternoon traffic. Luca pressed his face to the window, marveling at the buildings and lights. I sat rigid, watching Vincent watch me, aware that every moment was a test I wasn't sure how to pass. The estate appeared behind high walls and iron gates that opened at our approach. The house beyond was massive, a modern fortress disguised as a mansion, all stone and glass and careful landscaping. Security cameras were visible at strategic points. Men in dark suits patrolled the grounds. This wasn't a home. It was a compound. "Welcome," Vincent said as the SUV stopped before the main entrance, "to your new life." And as he opened the door, letting in the cold December air and the weight of everything I'd lost and everything I'd become, I wondered if there would ever be a way back from this. Or if Elena Castellano had died somewhere on the road between Minnesota and here, leaving behind only a ghost wearing expensive clothes and carrying a child into a world of beautiful, terrible things. The woman who greeted us in the entrance hall looked like she'd been carved from ice and expectation. Sophia Moretti stood at the base of a sweeping marble staircase, her silver hair pulled into an elegant chignon, her black dress simple, but clearly expensive. She was perhaps 70, but she held herself with the rigid posture of someone who'd never allowed age to diminish her authority. Her eyes, the same dark, assessing eyes as her son, swept over me with unconcealed disdain, before landing on Luca with something that might have been hunger. "So," her voice carried the faint trace of an Italian accent, refined by decades in America but never fully erased. "This is Marco's bastard." I felt Luca flinch against me, felt my own anger rise hot and sharp, but before I could speak, Vincent's hand closed around my elbow. Not painful, but firm enough to be a warning. "Mother," he said, his voice carrying a thread of steel beneath the courtesy, "this is your grandson, Luca, and his mother, Elena Castellano. They'll be staying in the East Wing as we discussed." Sophia's lips thinned, We discussed nothing. You informed me you were bringing them here. There's a difference. Nevertheless, they're here. They're family, and they'll be treated accordingly. Vincent released my elbow, moving to stand beside his mother. Even with the obvious tension between them, there was something unified in their stance, a shared language of power and expectation. Elena, this is my mother, Sophia Moretti. You'll show her respect, as she'll show you. The last part sounded more like a command than a prediction. Sophia's attention returned to Luca, and her expression shifted, softened. Fractionally, she descended 2 steps, bringing herself closer to eye level with him. Come here, child. Let me see you properly. Luca pressed harder against my leg, uncertain. I stroked his hair, torn between wanting to protect him and knowing I couldn't afford to make an enemy of this woman on our first day. It's okay, baby, I whispered. Go say hello to your grandmother. He looked up at me with those trusting eyes, then slowly walked toward Sophia. She studied him with the intensity of someone examining a precious artifact, taking in every detail, the dark curls, the shape of his face, the way he held himself with a mixture of shyness and curiosity. You have Marco's eyes, she said finally, and her voice cracked slightly on her dead grandson's name, and the Moretti chin, strong, good. She reached out and touched his cheek, a gesture that seemed to cost her something. Welcome home, Luca. Thank you, ma'am. His manners, taught in a dozen different motel rooms, made something flicker across Sophia's face. You will call me Nonna, she corrected. That is what family does. Nonna, Luca repeated carefully, trying out the unfamiliar word. Sophia straightened, her moment of vulnerability passing. Vincent will show you to your rooms. Dinner is at 7. You'll dress appropriately. We maintain standards in this house, regardless of circumstances. But the way she said it made clear what she thought of those circumstances. And of me. A woman appeared from a side hallway, middle-aged, pleasant-faced, wearing a simple gray dress and an expression of professional neutrality. This is Maria, Vincent said. She manages the household. If you need anything, ask her. She'll show you to your wing and help you get settled. Maria smiled warmly at Luca. Hello, young man. I've prepared your room myself. Would you like to see it? Luca looked to me for permission. I nodded, not trusting my voice. Maria took his hand gently and led him toward the staircase, chattering about the toy room and the books she'd selected, and the cookies waiting in the kitchen. The moment he was out of earshot, Sophia turned the full force of her disapproval on me. You are the woman who stole from my family, who denied my grandson his father, who spent 18 months dragging Marco's child through poverty and uncertainty. Each word was precisely enunciated, cutting. Vincent may have promised you protection, but understand this, girl. You are here on sufferance. One mistake, one hint that you're corrupting that boy or filling his head with ideas above his station, and I will find a way to remove you. Are we clear? Perfectly. I met her gaze, refusing to look away first. But understand this, Mrs. Moretti. I'm his mother. I've loved him and protected him, and sacrificed everything for him, while your family was nothing but a name that terrified me. You can hate me all you want, but you won't separate me from my son. Sophia's eyes narrowed. We'll see how long Vincent's protection lasts once you inevitably disappoint him. Gold diggers always do. Mother, enough. Vincent's voice cracked like a whip. Elena is under my personal protection. Challenge that again, and you and I will have a conversation you won't enjoy. The tension stretched between them, mother and son, locked in a battle of wills I didn't fully understand. Finally, Sophia inclined her head. Not quite submission, but acknowledgement. As you wish, but don't say I didn't warn you when this arrangement proves problematic. She turned and swept from the hall, her posture ramrod straight, leaving behind the faint scent of expensive perfume and disapproval. I released a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Vincent studied me with what might have been approval. You stood up to her. Most people don't. She threatened my son. I don't care who she is. Good. He gestured toward the staircase. Come, I'll show you to your rooms myself. The east wing was more than generous. It was obscene. A master bedroom with an attached sitting room, decorated in soft grays and creams. A bathroom with a soaking tub and a shower large enough for 3 people. A walk-in closet already filled with clothes in my size, shoes lined up like soldiers, jewelry in velvet boxes. And next to it, connected by a door I could lock from either side, was Luca's room. I stood in the doorway, my throat tight. It was a child's paradise, a bed shaped like a race car, shelves overflowing with books and toys, a whole corner dedicated to dinosaurs. Luca was already on the floor, making vrooming sounds as he pushed a toy truck across the plush carpet, his earlier fear forgotten in the wonder of having things that were actually his. "The playroom is down the hall," Vincent said from behind me. "Larger toys, games, arts, and crafts supplies. There's also a movie theater on the ground floor, a pool in the basement, and a gym. The grounds have been made safe for children. No access to the pond without supervision. The gates are always locked. Security is always present. It's a beautiful prison," I said quietly. "It's a palace. Most people would be grateful." I turned to face him, aware of how close he was in the doorway, of the subtle scent of his cologne, and the intensity of his regard. "I never wanted a palace. I wanted freedom. I wanted to raise my son away from all of this." "And how was that working out for you?" His voice was soft, but the question cut deep. "Another 6 months, maybe a year, and you would have run out of money, out of options, out of towns willing to pay a single mother cash under the table. At least here, Luca will never go hungry, never be cold, never have to hear his mother lie awake at night worrying how to pay for his next meal." "You don't know. I know everything, Elena." He stepped closer, and I fought the urge to back away. "I know you worked 3 jobs while pregnant because Marco was in jail for assault. I know you maxed out your credit cards to pay for prenatal care. I know you gave birth alone because you had no family, no friends you trusted with the truth. I know that when you discovered what Marco really was, you had exactly $217 in your checking account and a newborn who needed formula. So yes, you stole. And yes, you ran. And I can respect the desperation that drove those choices. But don't pretend your life on the run was some noble sacrifice. It was survival, and it was ending whether I found you or not." Tears burned behind my eyes. I hated that he was right, hated that he'd stripped away all my justifications and left me standing in the naked truth of my failures. "What do you want from me?" The question came out broken. His expression shifted, something almost like gentleness crossing his features. "I want you to stop fighting the inevitable. Accept that you're here, that this is Luca's life now, and make the best of it. Be his mother. Raise him well. And in return, you'll have security, comfort, and my protection. It's not the life you imagined, but it's the life you have. The question is whether you're strong enough to embrace it." Before I could answer, Luca called out, "Mama, come see. This truck has working lights." Vincent stepped back, giving me space. "Dinner is at 7. Don't be late. My mother may be difficult, but she values punctuality." He paused at the door. "And Elena? The clothes in your closet include formal wear. Choose something appropriate. First impressions with the family matter." He left, and I sank onto the edge of Luca's race car bed, watching my son play with toys that probably cost more than our motel room had for an entire month. He was happy. Genuinely, innocently happy. In a way I hadn't seen since before we started running. Maybe Vincent was right. Maybe I needed to stop fighting and start surviving in a different way. The afternoon passed in a blur of exploration. Maria appeared periodically, offering food, showing us the playroom, the library, the various rooms and hallways of this massive house. Luca made friends with her instantly, chattering about dinosaurs and Christmas and whether Santa had known to bring presents here instead of Minnesota. "Santa always knows," Maria assured him with a wink, "and I happen to know he left something special under the tree for you." At 6:30, I left Luca with Maria and returned to my room to dress for dinner. The closet offered too many choices, but I finally selected a simple black dress, elegant but not showy, with a modest neckline and hem that fell just below my knees. I found heels that didn't feel like torture devices and minimal jewelry. When I looked in the mirror, I saw someone who might belong in this world, even if she didn't feel like she did. Luca wore tiny dress pants and a button-down shirt that Maria had somehow produced in his exact size. He looked like a miniature version of the men I'd seen around the estate. Polished, proper, already being molded into something I didn't recognize. Maria led us to the dining room at precisely 7 o'clock. The room was designed to intimidate. A table that could seat 20, crystal chandeliers, oil paintings of stern-faced ancestors watching from the walls. Sophia sat at one end, Vincent at the other, with 2 empty chairs positioned along the side. For us. But they weren't alone. 3 other people sat at the table. A man in his 40s with Vincent's dark eyes but a softer face, a woman who looked to be in her 30s with carefully styled blonde hair, and a dress that cost more than a car, and a teenage boy who looked bored and vaguely hostile. Elena, Luca, Vincent said, rising slightly in a gesture of courtesy that seemed almost mocking given the circumstances. Allow me to introduce the rest of the family. My brother, Anthony, his wife, Christine, and their son, David. Anthony smiled warmly, standing to shake my hand. Welcome. We've been very curious to meet you both. Christine's smile was cooler, more assessing. Yes. Vincent's been quite secretive about the whole thing. David didn't bother looking up from his phone. Please sit. Vincent gestured to the empty chairs. Let's eat. Luca climbed into his seat, his eyes wide as servants appeared with the first course, a soup that smelled divine and probably had a name I wouldn't be able to pronounce. I helped him with his napkin, acutely aware of everyone watching. Judging, this was my life now. Dinner with the Moretti family, raising my son in a world of wealth and danger, trying to protect him from the very people who'd sworn to protect us both. And as Vincent raised his wine glass in a toast, to family and to new beginnings, I lifted my water glass and wondered if there would ever be a way to make peace with what I'd become. Or if I'd spend the rest of my life looking for an escape that would never come. Bloco 5. The first week passed in a blur of adjustment and careful navigation. Luca adapted with the resilience of childhood, his days filled with toys and attention, and the kind of security I'd never been able to give him. He called Sophia Nonna without hesitation now, and she'd begun to soften toward him in small ways, reading him stories in Italian, teaching him to play chess with an antique set that had belonged to her father, allowing him to sit beside her during afternoon tea. But her coldness toward me never thawed. If anything, it crystallized into something sharper, more deliberate. I fell into a routine because routines were safe, predictable. Mornings with Luca, breakfast, then time in the playroom or the library. Afternoons while he napped or played with Maria, I'd retreat to my room, reading or simply staring out the window at the grounds I wasn't allowed to explore alone. Evenings meant dinner with the family, an exercise in tension and careful conversation where every word felt weighted, measured, and through it all, Vincent watched. Not obviously, not in a way I could protest, but I felt his attention like a physical thing. In the dining room, when his eyes would find me across the table, in the hallways, when I'd catch him observing me from doorways, in the reports I knew he received from Maria and the security staff about my movements, my habits, my integration into this gilded cage. It should have frightened me. Instead, it ignited something I didn't want to examine too closely, an awareness of him that felt dangerous and intoxicating in equal measure. On the 8th day, he summoned me to his office. The room was exactly what I'd expected. Dark wood, leather furniture, floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, and a massive desk that served as a throne from which he controlled his empire. He stood by the window when I entered, his back to me, hands clasped behind him in a pose that emphasized the breadth of his shoulders beneath his precisely tailored suit. Close the door, he said without turning. I did, my heart rate picking up for reasons I didn't want to acknowledge. He turned to face me, and something in his expression made me freeze. Not anger, exactly, something more complex, more intense. You've been here over a week, he began, moving to lean against the front of his desk, arms crossed. You've followed the rules, shown my mother respect despite her treatment of you, and devoted yourself to Luca's adjustment. Maria reports that you're polite to the staff, that you haven't attempted to contact anyone outside the estate, that you've accepted the limitations of your situation with more grace than I anticipated. Is there a question in there somewhere? I kept my voice steady despite the way his proximity affected my breathing. Why? The single word carried genuine curiosity. Why the sudden cooperation? You fought me so hard in Minnesota, and yet here you are, playing the perfect guest. What changed? I considered lying, deflecting. But something about the directness of his gaze demanded honesty. I realized you were right. I was running out of options, out of time. And Luca deserves better than what I could give him alone. So I'm making the best of it. That's what mothers do. Just that? Nothing to do with the comfort, the security, the fact that you're wearing a dress that costs more than you earned in 6 months of waitressing? Heat flooded my face. I didn't ask for any of this. No, you didn't. He pushed off the desk, closing the distance between us until I could smell his cologne, see the faint lines at the corners of his eyes. But you're not stupid enough to deny that it's better than where you were. The question is what you're willing to do to keep it. My pulse thundered. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting that you're a beautiful woman living in my house, eating at my table, wearing clothes I paid for. I'm suggesting that gratitude takes many forms. His voice dropped lower, intimate and dangerous, and I'm suggesting that you're not as immune to me as you pretend to be. I should have slapped him, should have turned and walked out, should have done anything except stand there feeling my body respond to his words, to his proximity, to the dark promise in his eyes. You're Luca's great uncle, I managed. It's inappropriate. This is pragmatic. His hand came up to my face, his thumb tracing my jawline with devastating gentleness. You need protection. I can provide it. You need security for your son. I can guarantee it. And in return, you give me what I want. What I've wanted since I saw you standing in that pathetic motel room, fierce and terrified and utterly magnificent. I won't. My protest died as his thumb brushed across my lower lip. Won't what? Won't admit that you feel this too? Won't acknowledge that every time I walk into a room your breathing changes? Won't confess that you've thought about this, about me, in ways that have nothing to do with gratitude or obligation? He was right, and I hated him for it. Hated that somewhere between fear and captivity, I'd begun to notice the way he moved, the rare moments when his controlled facade slipped, the intelligence and ruthlessness that should have repelled me, but instead drew me in like gravity. This is wrong, I whispered, even as I didn't pull away. Perhaps. But it's also inevitable. His other hand found my waist, pulling me closer until our bodies almost touched. I don't make a habit of wanting what I can't have, Elena. And I've decided I want you. You can't just decide. I can decide anything I want. That's what power means. His voice turned harder, edged with something raw. But I'm not my nephew. I'm not going to lie to you, manipulate you, or pretend this is something it's not. I want you in my bed, in my life. And I'm offering you a choice. Say yes, and I give you everything. My protection, my resources, my word that Luca will want for nothing and you'll never run again. Or say no, and remain exactly where you are. A guest in my house, dependent on my goodwill, always wondering when that goodwill might run out. It was blackmail dressed up as seduction, and we both knew it. But it was also honest in a way Marco had never been. Vincent wasn't pretending to love me, wasn't making promises he couldn't keep. He was offering a transaction, my body, my compliance, in exchange for absolute security. The room felt too hot, too small. And if I say yes, what does that make me? Mine. The word came out possessive, final. It makes you mine, Elena, under my protection, in my bed, untouchable by anyone who might wish you harm, including my mother. That last part cut through the haze of desire and fear. Sophia has been making inquiries about your past, about Marco's death, about whether there might be grounds to challenge your custody of Luca through the courts. His expression darkened. She's threatened by you, by what you represent. But if you're with me, truly with me, she won't dare touch you. No one will. My mind raced. This was manipulation, coercion, but it was also survival. And hadn't I already compromised everything to keep Luca safe? What was one more compromise, one more piece of myself traded for his security? I need time to think. No. His grip on my waist tightened. You've had a week to think, to observe, to understand how this world works. I'm not a patient man, Elena, and I'm done waiting. Give me your answer. Now." The air between us crackled with tension. I could see my reflection in his dark eyes, disheveled, conflicted, already half surrendered, and beneath my fear and anger, I felt something else rising, something that had been building since the moment he'd knocked on that motel room door. Want. Pure and terrifying and undeniable. "Yes," I heard myself say. The word barely a breath. "Yes." Something fierce and triumphant flashed across his face. "Say it properly. Say you're mine. I'm yours." The words felt like a confession and a condemnation. "I'm yours, Vincent." He kissed me then, not gently, but with a hunger that stole my breath and my resistance. His hands tangled in my hair, tilting my head back as he claimed my mouth with a thoroughness that left no room for doubt about his intentions. I kissed him back with equal desperation, my hands fisting in his shirt, pulling him closer, even as some small voice in my head screamed that this was wrong, dangerous, a point of no return. When he finally pulled back, we were both breathing hard. "Tonight," he said, his voice rough. "After Luca's asleep, you'll come to my room, and Elena..." His thumb brushed my swollen lips. "Don't make me wait." He released me and stepped back, his expression already shifting back to that controlled mask, but I could see the tension in his shoulders, the evidence that he wasn't as unaffected as he pretended. "Go," he said. "Before I forget, we have staff in this house and take you right here on my desk." I fled, my heart pounding, my body trembling with a mixture of fear and anticipation. What had I just agreed to? What had I just become? The day crawled by with agonizing slowness. I went through the motions, playing with Luca, eating lunch, reading him stories. But my mind was elsewhere, caught between dread and something darker, more primal. Dinner was torture. Vincent sat at the head of the table as always, conversing with Anthony about business I didn't understand. But occasionally his eyes would find mine, and the promise in them made it impossible to focus on anything else. Sophia noticed. Of course she noticed. Her gaze sharpened, moving between Vincent and me with growing suspicion. But she said nothing, and I wondered if she already knew, if she'd seen this coming before I had. After dinner, I put Luca to bed, reading him 3 stories instead of the usual one, delaying the inevitable. He fell asleep, clutching his toy car, peaceful and secure, unaware that his mother was about to cross a line she could never uncross. I stood in my bathroom for a long time, staring at my reflection. I'd showered, changed into a silk nightgown I'd found in the closet, black, elegant, clearly chosen for this purpose. My hands shook as I brushed my hair, applied minimal makeup, tried to quiet the war raging inside me. This was survival. This was protection. This was the price of keeping Luca safe. But it was also desire, and that was the part I couldn't rationalize away. Vincent's bedroom was in the west wing, far from prying eyes and curious children. I walked through the silent house in bare feet, my heart hammering so hard I thought it might burst from my chest. His door was unlocked. I pushed it open to find him waiting by the window, dressed in dark slacks and an open white shirt that revealed the powerful lines of his chest. He turned at my entrance, and the heat in his eyes nearly made me turn and run. "Lock the door," he said softly. I did, the click of the lock feeling like sealing a contract written in my own surrender. He crossed to me slowly, deliberately, giving me time to change my mind. But I stood my ground, my chin lifted in defiance or invitation. I wasn't sure which. "Last chance to walk away," he said, his fingers finding the strap of my nightgown. "After this, you're mine, completely. No running, no regrets, no pretending this didn't happen. I'm already yours," I whispered. "You made sure of that the moment you brought us here." "No." He pulled me against him, his hand tangling in my hair. "That was obligation. This is choice. I want you to choose this, Elena. Choose me." And God help me, I did. I reached up and pulled his mouth down to mine, kissing him with all the pent-up fear and anger and desperate need that had been building for days. He responded with a groan, his hands roaming over my body, claiming every inch of me with a possessiveness that should have terrified me, but instead set me on fire. We didn't make it to the bed immediately. He backed me against the wall, his mouth on my neck, my collarbone, the swell of my breasts above the nightgown's neckline. I gasped and arched into him, my fingers digging into his shoulders, my mind going blank except for sensation and need. When he finally carried me to the bed, when he stripped away the silk barrier between us and showed me exactly what it meant to belong to Vincent Moretti, I understood that I'd been lying to myself all along. This wasn't just survival. This wasn't just protection for my son. This was me, choosing the darkness, choosing the man who'd captured us, choosing to stop running and start claiming this twisted new life as my own. Hours later, I lay in his arms, my head on his chest, listening to his heartbeat, slow to something approaching normal. His fingers traced patterns on my bare shoulder, absent and possessive at once. Regrets? He asked quietly. Too many to count. I tilted my head to look at him, but not about this. Not anymore. His arm tightened around me. Good. Because I meant what I said. You're mine now, Elena, and I protect what's mine with everything I have. Even from your own mother? Especially from her. He pressed a kiss to my forehead. She'll adjust. She has no choice. You're not just Luca's mother anymore. You're under my personal protection. My companion. That means something in this family. What does it mean? I needed to understand the rules of this new game. It means no one touches you without answering to me. It means you have power here, if you're smart enough to use it. It means... He paused, his expression softening slightly. You're not alone anymore. You haven't been since the moment I knocked on that motel door. You just needed time to understand it. I thought about that. About how I'd spent 18 months alone, terrified, shouldering everything by myself. And now I had Vincent, dangerous, ruthless, but absolutely certain in his protection. It should have felt like trading one prison for another. Instead, it felt like coming home. What happens now? I asked. Now you sleep. Tomorrow we tell the family. My mother will be displeased, but she'll accept it. Anthony and Christine will adjust their expectations accordingly. And Luca, his voice gentled, Luca continues to grow up safe, loved, and protected. By both of us. You care about him? It wasn't a question. I'd seen it in the way Vincent watched my son. The gifts that appeared in his room. The security measures that focused primarily on Luca's safety. He's family, and he's all that remains of Marco. Of course I care. Vincent shifted, turning to face me more fully. But I also care about you, Elena. More than I planned to. More than is probably wise. But there it is. It wasn't a declaration of love. Vincent Moretti wasn't the type for flowery speeches or romantic gestures, but it was honest. And in this world, honesty was rarer than diamonds. I care about you too, I admitted. I don't want to, and I don't fully understand it, but I do. Then we're both fools, but he smiled as he said it, and for the first time since Minnesota, I felt something like peace settle over me. I woke in my own bed the next morning, alone. Vincent had carried me back before dawn, not wanting Luca to wake and find me missing. But the sheets smelled like his cologne, and my body ached in ways that proved the night hadn't been a dream. Luca was already awake when I checked on him, playing with toy dinosaurs on his bedroom floor. He looked up with a bright smile. Mama, Nonna says we're having a special breakfast. Can we go? Of course, baby. Let me get dressed. The special breakfast turned out to be a family announcement. When Luca and I entered the dining room, everyone was already assembled. Sophia at her usual place, looking grim, Anthony and Christine whispering to each other, David scrolling through his phone, and Vincent, standing at the head of the table, waiting. His eyes met mine, and something hot and possessive flashed in them before he schooled his expression to neutrality. Good morning. Please sit. We have something to discuss. I helped Luca into his chair, my heart pounding. This was it. The moment everything became public, official. No going back. As you all know, Vincent began, his voice carrying the authority that made boardrooms and crime families alike bend to his will. Elena and Luca have been with us for just over a week. In that time, I've come to a decision about their permanent status in this family. Sophia's fork clattered against her plate. Vincent, Elena will be moving into the West Wing with me, he continued, ignoring his mother's interruption. She'll be accorded all the respect and protection that comes with being under my personal guardianship. Anyone who wishes to challenge this is welcome to discuss it with me privately. But the decision is final. Silence crashed over the table. Christine's eyes widened. Anthony looked between Vincent and me with dawning understanding. David actually looked up from his phone, interested for the first time since we'd arrived, and Sophia. Sophia looked like she'd been slapped. "You cannot be serious," she said, her voice shaking with fury. "This woman is a thief, a runaway. She kept Marco's child from us for years. She protected Marco's child when Marco failed to." Vincent cut her off, his voice hard as steel. "She gave up everything to keep Luca safe, and now she's given herself to me, to this family, trusting that we'll honor that sacrifice. I intend to prove her trust wasn't misplaced. The question is whether you'll support this decision, or force me to choose between you and her." The threat hung in the air, unsubtle and absolute. Sophia stared at her son for a long moment, her face a mask of betrayal and rage. Then she stood, her napkin dropping to the table. "You've made your choice clear. I hope you don't come to regret it." She swept from the room, her exit dramatic and damning. Anthony cleared his throat. "Well, this is unexpected. But if it's what you want, Vincent, the family will support it. It's what I want," Vincent confirmed. His eyes found mine again, softer now. "What we both want." I nodded, not trusting my voice. Luca, oblivious to the undercurrents, was more interested in the pancakes Maria had just brought out. "Mama, can I have chocolate chips in mine?" "Of course, baby." I smoothed his hair, anchoring myself in his innocence. "Whatever you want." The weeks that followed transformed everything. I moved into Vincent's wing, into his bed, into a life I hadn't known I wanted until it was mine. Sophia maintained her cold distance, but she didn't challenge Vincent's claim on me. The rest of the family adjusted, treating me with a wary respect that grew as I proved I wasn't just some gold digger Vincent would tire of. And Luca thrived. He had cousins now. David warmed to him eventually, teaching him video games and letting him tag along like a little shadow. He had a grandmother who doted on him despite her feelings about me. He had security, education, a future that stretched out bright and certain. He had everything I'd dreamed of giving him when I first discovered I was pregnant, back when I'd still believed in happy endings. On Christmas Eve, exactly 1 year after Vincent had knocked on that motel door, I stood in our bedroom watching snow fall over the estate grounds. Vincent came up behind me, wrapping his arms around my waist, pulling me back against his chest. "Regrets?" he asked, as he had so many times before. "Only that I didn't trust you sooner." I turned in his arms, looking up at the man who'd captured us and freed us in the same breath. "Only that I wasted so much time running. You were protecting him. I understand that better than you think." He kissed my forehead, gentle despite his fearsome reputation. "But you're home now, both of you. And I'll spend the rest of my life making sure you never have reason to run again." From Luca's room next door, I heard him calling out in excitement about presents and Santa and all the wonder of childhood. Vincent released me so I could go to him, but caught my hand before I could leave. "I love you," he said simply. 3 words he'd never spoken before, offered like a gift on Christmas Eve. "I need you to know that. This isn't just possession or protection anymore. It's love." Tears pricked my eyes. "I love you too. God help me. I love you too." He pulled me close, kissing me with a tenderness that belied his ruthless exterior. And for the first time since the night I discovered what Marco really was, since the moment I grabbed Luca and ran into the darkness, I felt completely, utterly safe. I'd walked away with their son forever. But Vincent had found us on Christmas night, and instead of destroying us, he'd given us something I'd stopped believing in. A family. A home. A future. And maybe, just maybe, that had been worth the running, worth the fear, worth everything it took to get here. Because this, Vincent's arms around me, Luca's laughter in the next room, the knowledge that we were protected and loved and finally home, this was what happiness looked like in the darkness. and I wouldn't trade it for anything in the world.